But now on BBC Radio 4 we continue our series Fantastic Tales, a week of classic European stories exploring the weird and the wonderful. Today Jamie Glover reads Autumn Sorcery by Joseph von Eichendorff, a passionate tale about doomed love and enchantment.
One tranquil autumn afternoon, when he was hunting, the knight Ubaldo found himself separated from his company. Suddenly he saw coming towards him a man dressed in strange clothes. His face was handsome, but pale and covered by a thick, unkempt beard. Mutually surprised, the two men greeted each other, and Ubaldo explained that, unfortunately, he was lost. The stranger invited him to spend the night. Ubaldo accepted and followed the hermit through the deserted canyons. Soon they came to a spacious cave. Ubaldo tied his horse at the entrance while his host silently brought some bread and wine. After he sat down, the knight could not keep from asking the stranger who he was and what had brought him there. "Do not inquire into who I am," the hermit replied dryly, and his face became somber and severe. Ubaldo was exhausted, so he lay down on the bed of dry leaves his host had offered him and immediately fell asleep. Barely had the first rays of the morning sun begun to shine through the treetops when the hermit appeared before the knight to show him the path towards the canyons. Ubaldo joyfully mounted his horse, and his strange guide galloped silently beside him. Soon they reached the top of the mountain and contemplated the dazzling plain that suddenly appeared at their feet. The hermit seemed especially surprised. "Oh, how beautiful the world is," he exclaimed, clearly moved. He then covered his face with both hands and hastened to bury himself again in the forests. Ubaldo, shaking his head, took the familiar road that led to his castle. Curiosity led him to seek out those solitary places again, and with great effort he managed to find the cave where the hermit this time received him somberly and silently. To Ubaldo, it seemed that the hermit's spirit was struggling in vain against grievous sins. That impelled the pious knight to visit more frequently, to help that vacillating spirit with all his strength. At last, the good knight managed to convince the hermit to accompany him to his castle. Night had already fallen when they reached the fortress. Ubaldo ordered a beautiful fire and the best wines he possessed. It was the first time the hermit seemed at his ease. "You," he said, "are happy, and I behold your strong and gallant figure with true fear and deep respect." Ubaldo, who did not want to miss his chance to take advantage of his guest's unusual behavior, vigorously insisted he reveal the story of his life. The hermit was pensive. "If you promise me," he said finally, "to keep what I tell you a secret forever." The knight raised his hand to signal his oath, and immediately summoned his wife, whose silence he vouched for, so that along with him she could hear the story they so anxiously awaited. The hermit began to speak in the following way. "The autumn sun was rising over the blue mist that covered the valleys near my castle. The festivities were coming to an end, and the guests were leaving. It was a farewell celebration that I was offering to my dearest friend, who that day was to join the Christian army in the conquest of the Holy Land. I wandered for a long time, until I finally found I was lost. Suddenly, the sound of several hunting horns reached my ears. Some voices were accompanying them in a song. Until then, no melody had ever moved me in such a fashion. I was unable to resist, and I went on listening to the seductive tune. Finally, I left the forest and saw, right before me, a majestic castle on the crest of a mountain. Stretching down to the forest, smiled a most beautiful garden, surrounding the castle like a magic ring, all the trees and hedges afire with the violent hues of autumn. I was shocked to see, amid such magnificence, that under the arbors was the damsel of my dreams, who was strolling and singing that same melody. When she saw me, she fell silent. I passed through the entrance and went directly to the garden where my beloved was standing. I fell at her feet, overcome by so much beauty. She was wearing a dark red dress, and long transparent veils covered her golden curls. She helped me to my feet, and in a voice broken by grief said to me, "How I love you, handsome and unfortunate young man. When autumn begins its mysterious festival, my desire awakens with new and irresistible force. Poor wretch, how have you come to the sphere of my song? Leave me and go away." When I heard those words, I was seized by a great tremor and begged her to explain, but she did not answer. Meanwhile, it had grown dark, and the damsel's mien became grave and majestic. "You must know," she said, "that your childhood friend, who this very day bade you farewell, is a traitor. I've been forced to betroth myself to him. Only out of jealousy did he hide his love from you. He is not departed for Palestine. Tomorrow he will come to take me to a distant castle where I shall be hidden from the gaze of others forever. We shall only see each other again if he dies." Having said that, she kissed me on the lips and disappeared into the dark galleries. Terrified, I pondered the horrifying words of her farewell. I wanted to flee far from there, but her kiss still burned on my lips, so I could not do it. I wandered through the forest in order to distract myself with hunting. Suddenly I saw on a treetop a bird whose plumage was more marvelous than any I'd ever seen. Just when I pulled the string back and was ready to shoot the arrow, it flew to another tree. I pursued it avidly, but the bird continued to jump from treetop to treetop. Night caught me in the forest. The sky had darkened, and a huge storm appeared over the mountains. "We shall only see each other again if he dies," I repeated to myself, while I fled as if chased by ghosts. Finally, almost losing control of my senses, I scaled a high rock with a noisy creek running beneath it. From the top, I could make out a dark shadow, silent and motionless. A blood-colored moon appeared for an instant, and I recognized my friend, my beloved's fiancé. As soon as he saw me, he hastily got to his feet. Enraged, I threw myself at him. We fought for a few seconds, and then I threw him from the crag. I ran quickly from that horrible place. I arrived at my beloved's castle, and banged on the door with all my strength. "Let me in," I shouted. "Open the door. I've killed the brother of my heart. Now you are mine, both on earth and in hell." The door opened, and the damsel, more beautiful than ever, threw herself against my breast and covered me with burning kisses. I shall not speak of the torrents of light and music, of the pleasure I tasted in the arms of the damsel. I observed that from time to time my love, amid all that splendor, would fall into a terrible melancholy whenever she saw from the castle that autumn was going to bid us farewell. Once, as I stood next to her at a window, I noted that my beloved was sadder and more silent than usual. Outside, in the garden, the winter wind was playing with the fallen leaves. Suddenly, she clutched me in her arms and began a strange song which echoed throughout the room with melancholy notes. I listened, astonished. It was as if that melody were pushing me downward. My eyes closed involuntarily, and I fell asleep. When I awoke, it was night. My beloved was sleeping at my side on a silk bed. I observed her with astonishment. She was pale, as if dead. Everything else around me remained the same. Nevertheless, it seemed to me that a great deal of time had passed. I looked again at the image of the damsel. She looked like a stone statue, as cold and immobile as death. I was possessed by a terror the likes of which I'd never felt. I fled the chamber and sped through the deserted halls where all splendor had been extinguished. At the foot of the mountain there was a solitary lake, on whose shore some maidens were marvelously singing, and at the same time seemed to amuse themselves by stretching strange spiderwebs out over the meadow in the moonlight. That vision and that song increased my terror. I quickly leapt the garden wall. Little by little, the night became warmer and quieter. The nightingales were singing in the bushes. Old forgotten memories came to light again in my extinguished heart. "What is all this? Where am I?" I shouted in astonishment. The autumn and winter had gone by. Spring once again illuminated the world. My God, where had I been for so long? Finally, I reached the top of the last mountain. A splendid sun was rising. A tremor of pleasure rippled through the earth. I fell to my knees and wept bitterly for my lost life. I did not understand, and still do not understand, how it all happened. I resolved not to return to the joyful and innocent world with this heart full of sin and unrestrained anxiety. I decided to bury myself alive in a desolate place, invoke the forgiveness of heaven, and not to see the houses of men ever again until I'd washed away with tears of sincere repentance all my sins. Thus I lived for an entire year until I met you. Every day I raised up ardent prayers, and at times I thought I'd overcome everything and found the grace of God. But it was a false illusion that quickly faded. When the autumn spread its marvelous net of colors over the hills, very familiar songs came again from the forest. They penetrated my solitude, and dark voices within me responded to them. "Poor Raimundo," exclaimed Ubaldo, who had listened to the hermit with profound emotion. "For the love of God, who are you that know my name?" asked the hermit, as if struck by lightning. "My God," answered the knight, affectionately embracing the trembling hermit. "Don't you recognize me? I am your old and faithful comrade in arms, Ubaldo, and this is your Berta, whom you loved in secret. I only recognized you when you began to tell your story. I have never been in a place like the one you describe, and never fought with you on a cliff. Immediately after that party, I left for Palestine, where I fought for several years, and when I returned, the beautiful Berta became my wife. She, too, never saw you after that party, and everything you've told is an idle fantasy. My poor Raimundo, an evil charm that awakens every autumn has held you for many years." Because of his own joy, Ubaldo did not realize that his friend was trembling more and more strongly with each of his words. Raimundo stared at him and his wife with wild eyes. "Lost. All lost," he exclaimed tragically. He pulled free of Ubaldo's arms and fled quickly into the night toward the forest. "Yes, everything is lost, and my love and all my life are nothing more than a long illusion," he said to himself as he ran. Suddenly he saw advancing through the valley the beautiful damsel, riding on a spirited stallion. She was in the flower of her youth. Silvery threads of summer floated on her back. On a branch, a bird was singing a marvelous song that filled his heart with great nostalgia. Raimundo followed the sweet figure, preceded by the bird's strange song. The further he advanced, the more the song transformed into the melody of the hunting horns, which in another time had seduced him. Overcome by madness, poor Raimundo followed after the melody through the depth of the forest. From that day on, he was never seen again.
Jamie Glover was reading Autumn Sorcery by Joseph von Eichendorff. The story was translated by Alfred McAdam, and the producer was Gemma Jenkins.